They said it would never happen. Yet here it is. A single decision lighting a fuse on the two pillars of American life. The technology that runs your world and the medicine that keeps you alive. This is not a headline you can ignore, because the shock it delivers will ripple into every home, every paycheck, and every plan you thought was safe. The White House has just fired a shot that could reshape the balance of economic power, a terror shock aimed at imported semiconductors. This isn't just a political headline. It's a direct strike at the lifeblood of modern technology, the invisible arteries that keep everything from your phone to your car to the global stock market running. And if you think this only matters to tech companies, you're about to see how it could bleed into something far more personal: your health. Before we get to the fallout, you need to understand why this moment may mark the start of an economic chain reaction, one that could stretch from the devices in your hand to the prescriptions on your nightstand. But here's where it gets more dangerous. Buried in the same set of announcements was something the markets caught on to almost instantly. The White House is openly considering a similar approach with pharmaceuticals. And unlike the chip industry, which at least has a small but growing domestic production base, the U.S. pharmaceutical supply chain is almost completely tied to overseas production. Active pharmaceutical ingredients, the raw materials that make up the pills and treatments millions depend on, are overwhelmingly sourced abroad, with heavy reliance on India and China. This is why analysts are already warning about potential price spikes for generics and even life-saving drugs. If tariffs escalate into the triple digits, as some in the administration have floated, we could be looking at shortages that make the recent supply chain crunch look like a warm-up. And if you've been following the news over the last few years, you know how quickly temporary shortages can turn into permanent restructuring of entire industries. Now let's rewind to the motivation behind these moves. On paper, the official narrative is about securing domestic production and reducing dependence on geopolitical rivals. In practice, this is also about leverage, economic, political, and even military. By using tariffs as a blunt instrument, the U.S. is signaling that it's willing to weaponize trade to protect what it sees as strategic vulnerabilities. And in the hierarchy of modern vulnerabilities, chips and drugs sit right at the top. The semiconductor angle has an added layer of complexity. Unlike clothing or furniture, you can't simply ramp up production by building a few extra factories. Chip fabs take years to plan, build, and bring online, and the process requires a skilled workforce and access to specialized raw materials. Even with record levels of investment pouring into U.S. semiconductor manufacturing, there's no guarantee the gap can be closed fast enough to avoid bottlenecks. That means higher prices, longer lead times, and an uneven playing field for companies caught in the middle. Meanwhile, the pharmaceutical industry faces its own bottlenecks, but with higher stakes for everyday Americans. Even drugs that are technically manufactured in the U.S. often rely on raw materials imported from abroad. A tariff doesn't just hit the final product, it hits every link in the chain, from chemical precursors to packaging materials. That's why some experts believe that a blanket tariff on pharmaceuticals could backfire, driving costs higher for patients and forcing smaller manufacturers out of the market entirely. Of course, there's another side to this story, one the administration is keen to highlight. In theory, tariffs could drive a wave of domestic investment, creating jobs, reducing dependency, and strengthening national security. If the U.S. can successfully incentivize onshore production of chips and key drugs, it would blunt the leverage of countries currently dominating those supply chains. That's the long game, but the short-term pain could be severe, and the markets know it. Here's where the uncertainty kicks in and why investors, companies, and even foreign governments are scrambling for answers. Tariffs are not a static policy. They can be expanded, reduced, or suddenly dropped based on negotiations, retaliations, and geopolitical developments. This means the rules of the game could change midstream, forcing companies to make billion-dollar decisions under a cloud of uncertainty. And that uncertainty is poison for planning. If you think the market reaction is overblown, consider what happened during previous tariff wars. The mere announcement of a policy shift was often enough to send entire sectors into chaos. Now we are talking about moves that touch the very foundation of modern life, technology, and healthcare at the same time. For the average person, the implications may feel abstract today. Your phone still works. Your prescriptions are still filled. But the ripple effects are already starting. Distributors are rethinking contracts. Manufacturers are quietly stockpiling components and raw materials. And in some cases, foreign suppliers are considering whether to bypass the U.S. market altogether if profit margins evaporate. What makes this moment different is a convergence of risk. In past trade disputes, the U.S. targeted one industry at a time. Here, we have simultaneous pressure on two of the most sensitive and vital sectors in the economy. If both fronts escalate, we could see a feedback loop where problems in one supply chain amplify problems in the other. Imagine a world where your hospital can't get the chips it needs for imaging machines and also can't afford the drugs for post-surgery care. That's not science fiction. It's a plausible scenario if these policies move forward without precision planning. And yet, this is also a test of resilience. Companies that can adapt quickly, whether through domestic partnerships, vertical integration, or technology substitutions, could emerge stronger and more independent. Those that can't may be forced into consolidation or exit. Either way, the landscape will look very different in a few years. The question now is how far the administration is willing to push, and here's where the answer becomes clearer. The very move we opened with, that high-stakes, two-pronged strike, is not a passing bluff. It is a deliberate play that will reshape the rules of trade, industry, and national leverage for years. Because make no mistake, when you touch both the brain and the bloodstream of modern civilization in one policy swing, you're not just playing politics, you're reshaping the future. If you want to stay ahead of the shifts that could redefine entire industries and impact your life directly, make sure you're you. This is just the beginning, and the next move could come faster than anyone expects. This is not the kind of decision that fades quietly into the background. Once tariffs of this magnitude are in motion, they become part of a larger geopolitical chess game where every move is countered and every concession comes at a cost. Investors know that once the first domino falls in a critical supply chain, the timing and force of the next ones are almost impossible to predict. For industries tied to chips and medicine, that unpredictability means entire budgets can be wrecked by a single policy announcement. History shows us that industries under sudden trade pressure either reinvent themselves at high speed or collapse under the weight of the changes. And in a global market still fragile from years of pandemic disruptions, there's far less room for error than policymakers may admit. The truth is, these sectors were already walking a tightrope before this move. The tariffs simply shook it. If you gain insight, consider subscribing to the channel for the latest news broken down first.